A conversation with Ralph Abraham on December the 16th, 2015 in London, when he was on his way back to California from India after attending a conference in Bangalore at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies on Consciousness, Cognition and Culture. We then go on to discuss the conference that I attended in England on psychedelics and in particular on visionary experiences involving seemingly autonomous entities. So Ralph, you've just got back from India where
Yes.
you've been at a conference
Yes.
in Bangalore about consciousness. So what happened?
Well, there have been a rash of conferences called something like Science and Consciousness, and they aim to reduce the so-called gap between the scientific paradigm and consciousness as experienced, let us say, in the Himalayas in the ancient times. So in the United States, they're always called science and consciousness, but in India they're just called consciousness because it's considered all one. I've been to 3 or 4 of these in India. This is the largest by far. There were 24 participants, speakers, and a large audience, all sponsored by the Tata Steel and the Indian government. Of the 24, there were 12 from outside, more or less, and 12 from inside India. And I'd like to say they were spread out over a spectrum of different fields, with so many in this field and so many in, but actually there were 24 different fields represented, and nobody could understand anybody else very well. But there was a significant polarity between the people studying philosophy and the people studying science. And among the scientists there were primarily 2 sorts, neuroscience and physics. Physics because of quantum mechanics and its importance or its potential importance for understanding consciousness. From the physicalist point of view, that is, these people see consciousness as physical states of the biological brain, more or less. And the philosophers are philosophers of consciousness, which means they are not practitioners, mostly, although they're equally divided between Hindu and Buddhist philosophy. I think there was only one practitioner besides myself, a Dutch man who was very expert in Vipassana and the Abhidhamma. So you get the picture of these people who can't talk to each other, but they were extremely nice people. From the science camp, there were a few who specialized in animal communication. And you might find this very interesting, but in terms of the theme of the conference, it contributed little, in my view. Although the experiments with animals are extremely sophisticated and very friendly with the animals. For example, a professor from the primate laboratory of Kyoto University, he brings up the baby chimpanzees in his home. So, for me, I have to say I didn't learn a great deal. They were my favorites among the speakers. One woman from Moscow who's an expert of Sanskrit philosophy, and she knew a lot about the tattvas of the Akash, and so my favorite subjects from my recent book. And there was a Buddhist philosopher who was actually a Tibetan Lama, long-time translator of the Dalai Lama, and he was extremely good, not only from his understanding of the subject, but his ability to make it very understandable. Then there was a physicist who's expert and great pioneer of quantum field theory. And I had always underestimated quantum field theory because I didn't know about it, but he was such a good conversationalist over a lunch that I ended up being kind of convinced it's interesting. So that's the whole story, except of course for my own presentation.
Oh, what was that?
And of course I was the only mathematician there, and I was a poor match in terms of communicating with these other people. So I had some 2-3 months ago prepared a paper called Mathematics and Mysticism, intended to be the basis of my talk in this conference. And I had, at that time, no idea who would be in the audience, the other participants. I was just thinking, well, there's a science and consciousness in India, and so I would try to inform them about the interface between actual experience and mathematical models of consciousness. And then I eventually realized that I got to know a few of the participants by name. This would be a poor topic, so I wrote another one, which was more a record of my psychedelic experiences, sort of a confessional. And then I wrote another one, and finally there were 4 of these, so when I came to talk, I had to kind of synthesize parts of the various ones in the context of my understanding the audience on the first-person basis after my arrival there and hearing some of the other talks and so on. So I gave them a talk because the title of this conference was not Science and Consciousness, it was Consciousness, Cognition, and Culture. So I spoke to them about mathematical cognition with the understanding that in mathematics you see things, and this kind of vision is not at all like ordinary vision. And it is facilitated by psychedelics, especially LSD and DMT. But meditation alone can produce these results. And even I claimed that the performance of mathematics on the research frontier is a kind of meditation. It's very like meditation, both focused meditation, concentration, and vipassana. So that was my idea. It would fit in with the theme of the conference, even if it didn't connect with the presentations of any of the other people. And I started out by singing them a verse of "On the Saints Come March Again," as it's an American budgeon. And then I introduced a mathematical model of consciousness called Panch Kosh, the 5 koshas, as well as the simplest, and also very similar to Plato, the simplest framework in which to position mathematical cognition. And then I claimed the communication between the 5 levels was by a process of resonance, as, for example, the Morphic Resonance of Rupert Sheldrake and so on. And then I gave the history of the Panch Kosh coming from the Taittiriya Upanishad 50600 BC. And then in terms of a little diagram, I explained the disjunctive theory of hallucination, in which the big difference is made between ordinary vision, which is a resonance down here between physical objects and the mind, and mathematical cognition, which is a resonance up there between the mind and the world of Platonic ideas, or the intellectual sphere, as it were. And this was only in about 30 minutes, and then I ended. So there was a stunned response to this talk. And after the talk, there was tea, so there was a break, and a huge number of people came up to contact me about the talk. Some of them touched my feet and said they loved me. And one explained that, "Oh, you've really got me there with these three keys." I said, "Well, what are the 3 keys?" And he said, "Nim Karoli," because it was explained that I had met Neem Karoli. And Neem Karoli and the Taittiriya Upanishad and Rupert Sheldrake. These were the three keys that endeared me to this audience.
Really?
So I was amazed to learn that Neem Karoli was this minor saint that I had met and few people had ever heard about. Is now hugely popular in India.
Really? Is this a recent phenomenon?
Yes. And I believe it's because of Steve Jobs.
Oh, why?
Well, Steve Jobs went to India to meet Neem Karoli, and he got there too late. Neem Karoli had passed. But he did visit the temple at Kanchi, the one where I had stayed for 6 months. And more recently, Steve Jobs, before his death, had mentioned this. It's mentioned in his biography, actually. He met some of the devotees, people that I knew, in Delhi or somewhere. So he had multiple contacts with Neem Karoli after his passing. And he was very impressed. And he was also experienced user of LSD, Steve Jobs was. So I felt, a couple points of contact between me and Steve Jobs. So Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, also knew Steve Jobs, and he got interested in Neem Karoli, and he went there recently. He went to the temple in Kanchi. Then he made a huge donation, I guess, to the temple. This was mentioned on Facebook somewhere, that Zuckerberg had been to Kanchi, and the result was that the traffic at the temple, the visitors that continue going there, had tripled since this word leaked out about Zuckerberg going there. So we see an interesting reversal of the roles of the United States and the Himalayan foothills in this Gurukul, I think it's called. Gurukul is the lineage. I think of this in terms of Darwinian evolution. The lineage of gurus from the very first one, 40,000 years ago, until today, with all its branching and multiple sects and adherence to more or less materialistic values and so on. There's an evolutionary process in which the Gurukul lineages are still ongoing, evolving, and there are new ones, of course. And the popularity of old ones, like Shankaracharya and so on, they wax and wane. So that's it for the conference. I was in Bangalore for 9 days. It was a 3-day conference. I had gone, this is, I claim, under the influence of Neem Karoli. I had gone there early, 3 days early, and stayed there 3 days after it was over for some vague reason that was completely wrong. That the organizers of the conference thought that students would want to talk to me or something. That nothing materialized. But within a very short time of my arrival, there was a talk by the Dalai Lama, for which I had a reserved seat in the front row.
At the conference, or just
no? Before the conference, it wasn't a coincidence. But he was Dalai Lama was visiting several similar conferences in different universities. I mean, everybody's interested now in Madhyamika, Buddhist philosophy and psychology. So it was justified that I went 3 days early. If I'd been there 2 days early, I would have missed a chance to hear the Dalai Lama for the first time. I would actually meet him, hold his hand, and have a talk about, of all things, education. And then staying the extra days afterwards, I got to meet someone who's a new translator of the Vedas, really an incredible, following in the footsteps of Sri Aurobindo. And this was the kind of thing that Neem Karoli had wanted me to do. So I thought my presence in India and the particular time frame and everything was more or less in the hands of Neem Karoli's ghost as puppeteer.
Amazing. I mean, having started your time in India with Neem Karoli after all these years, to have this, I thought he was a fading memory, for this all to surge back. But what about the Dalai Lama? Did you have what was he particularly interested in?
Oh, he is such a fantastic person. I had no idea. I mean, I had heard, but his humor, his charisma, his ability to connect, his ease in his role as whatever it is.
Yes.
So he is now obsessed with compassion. And so he was talking about compassion as if this is the answer to the world's problems, is the development of compassion as an individual characteristic feature of humans, and that this has to be nurtured in the culture. He said that the Guru tradition in India, the Sanskrit philosophy was in rapid decline now in the face of invasion not only by McDonald's but by Western science. And he encouraged young people, quite a few young people in the audience. I was amazed. He encouraged them to study the ancient traditions, even if it would be supplemental to their science studies. And he thought that compassion should be taught in school. So the word education came up a few times in his presentation. Afterwards, on the way out, when he was shaking hands with all the organizers and speakers who were in reserved seats in the front row, so he traversed the front row, shaking hands more or less, and people were telling him where they came from, and he asked, "Where did you come from?" And so he came to me. I said, "California." And he stopped like he was shocked, and he had an excited conversation with these two young monks who were helping prop him up, and it turned out that California was of immediate importance because the city of Anaheim, California, apparently had agreed to become a city of compassion. So this emerged in this meeting. Later on, when I went home and I Googled City of Compassion, I found out that he has a whole program of encouraging cities worldwide to become official cities of compassion, in which they would emphasize in all and everything about the advertising of the city as a tourist destination or whatever, that it was a city of compassion. And on the basis of this, he told me on his way out from the auditorium that California must be a very advanced state because they were among the first to have a city of compassion. So when I Googled it later, I saw there were very few so far that had made this contract with the Dalai Lama, who has a whole foundation for cities of compassion. Only, I think, Vancouver, Seattle, and maybe Portland, Oregon are considering to be cities of compassion. So, of course, now I'll try to get Santa Cruz to be one of them. So that's my report. The whole conference experience of 9 days was very pleasant. I don't think that it advanced my personal program very much. I do think I will do some further work about quantum field theory and the boson condensate as the basis for consciousness.
I see.
And it relates to your current interest in cymatics, you see.
But to go back to your own talk on the psychedelics, were you the only person who brought in psychedelics into this conference?
Absolutely.
And it was otherwise not mentioned?
Right.
But altered were presumably dream states?
No.
So what was the focus on consciousness then? Purely on everyday consciousness or an advanced meditation or what?
Well, there was one talk on meditation, but most of the talks about, let's say, the psychology of consciousness were coming from Buddhist psychology or ancient Sanskrit literature. But what the word consciousness meant to almost everybody there, even meditators, is that you have an individual awareness of your sensory experience at the moment, including your feeling of yourself as the observer. There's a lot of talk about the self and the development of the self in chimpanzees and so on. But there was nothing about higher states or anything I would personally consider to be totally characteristic of the Hindu approach in philosophy and religion. There was no higher anything. It was just ordinary consciousness of now I feel temperature, I taste something, and so on. The lowest levels of the Panchakosha.
How disappointing. I mean, the point of doing this in India, I would have thought, with all these Buddhist and Hindu scholars, would have been precisely to go beyond this normal level of debate.
Yes, well, academic scholarship is somehow the baseline for these people, and advancement in their professions and so on is anathema to acknowledge higher states, apparently.
Well, even in India.
Yeah, even in India. So this was, of all the conferences of this sort that I've been to, there's only one, which was at the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, Gol Park, Calcutta.
Mm.
And they had a whole series of them also. Everybody's having a series. You see, so this one I just went to, there was the third in a series. In Gol Park, Calcutta, it was maybe the ninth in a series. In this particular one, the monks, who were they're full of the practice of meditation themselves and consideration of the higher states and the literature of the 36 tattvas and all that. They particularly were fed up with this resistance to go to the higher levels, and this one conference was devoted to experience, and they invited people who were experienced meditators, people who were locked in caves in Himalaya for 6 months every year since they were children. And that's the one where I made my first confession about LSD and living in a cave in the Himalayas and so on. And that was highly interesting. They had a practitioner from every tradition. They had a Kabbalistic Jew, and they had a Sufi dancing Muslim, and so on.
And so they were going beyond the academic level, obviously, into the world of experience.
Well, they talked about experience of higher levels in this one conference. But all the other conferences are totally academic. Either it's a science, where if you have an experience, you know you better not mention it or you won't be promoted, or in the academic department of philosophy in some university, where again, if you talk about anything outside of the normal channel, you'll be punished.
See, it's very interesting, because I too went to a consciousness symposium recently, but this was an unofficial one. It was a private meeting carried out in a country house in England, and it was kind of confidential, and it was basically about DMT experiences. And most people there were about a dozen people there, had experienced altered states of consciousness with DMT, ayahuasca, and other mind-altering brews. And the starting point was, how do we make sense of this experience? And one of the things that was a particular point of debate is, what is the nature of entities? A theme that we often discussed with Terence. I mean, This was familiar territory for me, and indeed most people there were very familiar with the writings of Terence McKenna and his tapes. And he has this after-death presence on the internet, as you know. I mean, he's
immortal.
He's immortalized.
Thanks to YouTube.
And he has thousands, maybe millions of followers. I mean, many of them young people.
Including in India.
Oh, really?
Yes. They came up to me afterwards. They knew every trialogue.
Yes. Exactly. Well, so Terence was in a kind of invisible presence at this meeting, and there was one or two discussions on, relation to brain states and so forth, and neurotransmitters, but people wanted to hurry ahead into discussing the nature of entities. Are these just produced by hallucinations by our own minds? Are there independent entities out there, and if so, what's their nature? Are they related to angels and the whole Western or other traditions of angelology? So we had talks on medieval angelology, how angels appear as independent beings in dreams and visions. And that was one of the first meetings on consciousness I felt had really got somewhere. I mean, it didn't resolve the issue of the nature of entities. I'm at a disadvantage because I don't encounter them or haven't so far. But because everybody there felt no need to pretend to be academic, and it was nothing to do with career advancement. Indeed, very attendance at this conference, if widely known, would probably be a severe check on one's career advancement. It would be a disadvantage. Because it was private, because it was by invitation only, because it was in a fairly remote country house, where you were in a kind of bubble. This was the first time I'd been to one of these consciousness conferences where I felt that there was a real increase in understanding, a real sharing of experiences.
Yes. Well, I think that's the right kind of conference to have. I think I'd like to go to a conference where DMT experiences, plural, were the ticket of admission, and to discuss the nature of the experience. Now, since all these years have passed, since Terence first telling me about his experiences according to this interpretation, and I had a negative take on it right away because it wasn't the same. I always feel that my experiences are the same as everyone else's experiences, but we describe them in different language because they're transverbal experiences to begin with. So even if you're a great poet like Blake or something, you can't really do justice to the experience in words or in music or in paintings or computer graphic animations. I think that I'm very excited about the disjunctive theory of hallucination. First of all, hallucination began to be an official topic in philosophy with Descartes' dream, and with the question is, what's the relationship with dream experience or ordinary experience, and can the individual observer tell the difference, and so on. It took a step forward with Charles Baudelaire, in the year 1847, more or less, wrote in his Confessions of a Hashish Eater. He presented a theory of hallucination and the difficulty to tell the difference under hashish and opium, of whether what's the relationship between the vision and ordinary experience. So about these entities, I am agnostic about entities myself. I'm fascinated by angelology and the Desert Fathers and paintings of angels by the masters like Fra Angelico, because these were like Fra Angelico is a person who did a lot of meditation and of a very high integrity, and he's trying to paint what he sees. I have to take seriously that here's like a human with wings. So here's my idea. If you have DMT experience and you see something which is, let us say, looks like your cymatic images, which are 2 or 3 dimensional objects with a great deal of symmetry and vibratory motion. They are fractals. They are very difficult to describe in words and impossible to draw. Only with computer graphics or this chimatic machine can you actually make one that you could share with somebody else. If that is the actual vision, let us say, similar to seeing a chair or a table in ordinary reality, and then you have a hallucination on top of that, in which you abstract images are realized by the process of associative memory with other images, which are also abstract but less abstract, and so on. And then there's the confusion. Can you tell which one is the original and which one is the representation of that mental state? And if the representation is a little less abstract than the original, it's easier to describe, easier to remember, to refer to in a further DMT trip or whatever. So I think that entities, say in the case of Terence McKenna, are a representation of an experience which is more mental state, which is more abstract and more cymatic, if you like. He said it appears like sort of mechanical robot type of beings.
The machine elves.
The machine elves. They're climbing down along a kind of a spider web of structures. And I can see that this is, if you take the actual image of something, let us say a Cézanne painting, and then you decrease the resolution, instead of becoming fuzzier, it becomes more concrete and less abstract, and also less like itself and more like something in ordinary reality. So if you do that to a DMT experience, maybe you end up with machine elves. It's just a conjecture of somebody else's experience, because I've seen in my own experience, as I penetrated deeper and deeper into this alternate reality by taking successive DMT trips, each one being a kind of continuation of where I left off in the last one, and exploring deeper and deeper in there, I would see like more and more of the colorful structure and the dancing of forms at such a high frequency, such an enormous speed, to more or less boggle the mind. You can't remember afterwards, it's just a swirl. What I could remember would be a poor imitation of the original, and I knew that, but I couldn't grasp, couldn't remember. I have to take another trip, to be reminded what was the real reality.
I see. That's very interesting. So your view is that these are constructs put upon more accessible and more familiar type constructs put
That's
on.
My conjecture. It's a theory. Yes.
Yes. I see. So, but Terence took the view that there's an autonomous realm of beings out there that speak to us and visit us and so on. And if one takes seriously shamanic traditions, where there are animal spirits and all sorts of autonomous spirits, including the spirits of the departed people, then you see the possibility there's a genuine realm, an autonomous realm of spirit beings, including dead people, is something that almost all traditions have acknowledged.
Yes. So in the shamanic tradition, you start out with 3 levels, 3 tattvas more or less, and by the time you get to Abhinavagupta in the Himalayas, there's 36 tattvas. So this is acknowledging being able to discriminate on higher and higher resolution of the different levels, but these are all real. So each one, as described in the Kashmiri Shaivism, each one is on a denser level a concrescence, a precipitation, a crystallate, as it were, from a level higher up. So my idea, my intuitive interpretation of my own DMT experience is that little by little I'm going to higher tattvas. I never got that far up, but I realized that there are several levels, and each one is real and is a poor resolution copy of the one above, where the ultimate intelligence is like more or less infinite in its array of details and so on, and only by the precipitation process can anything actually materialize down here. So the shamans with the animals, first of all, I think they're, in those days, 30, 40, 50,000 years ago, there was a very strong telepathy between humans and animals that's more or less lost now. So that the communication with an animal spirit would be as natural for them as communication with a human spirit of my grandmother or whatever would be to us. So the history of the shamanic tradition, to which of course the DMT experience belongs, is in a direct line of evolution from those original shamans in the painted caves and so on. I think that this is all real and needs to be discussed with different details filled in by different people who've been traveling in this way, even if it's by traditional meditation, by sleep yoga, by Tibetan, by locking in a cave, by tapas or illness or whatever, that these experiences have to be integrated by people who are seeking a bigger picture rather than thumping the drum for their own interpretation of their experience.
Yes. Well, this meeting I went to did actually have something of that quality, because people had had different experiences. Some had done ayahuasca in shamanic settings. Some had taken a lot of DMT. Some of them were Australians, where they have a kind of smokable herbal mixture called changa, which is a kind of popular DMT-based smoking mixture that I'd not heard of before, where it's part of a kind of popular culture in Australia. There it's mixed in with sort of popular psychedelic imagery and so forth, a revival of a kind of psychedelic culture. All these did come together, but it was obviously inconclusive. But certainly for me, as a model of a discussion, it was way beyond any of these science and consciousness conferences I'd been to myself, which tend to be dominated by neuroscientists and physicalists and people who think that it's all about the brain. And they're riding high at the moment because they've got billions of dollars to slice up brains and work out the connectome, how every nerve cell is connected to every other nerve cell. And they're so thinking that if they gather all this data together, somehow mathematicians will be able to make models that deal with this avalanche of data.
Well, in the long run, I think this kind of knowledge will have a very fundamental place in the lower realms. You see that it is, as we're always talking about, the television program versus the television receiver.
Yes.
That dissecting the receiver and finding out where the resistors and capacitors are, and the frequency of the oscillatory circuits and the decoding of the FM and so on, is all is kind of a ladder to heaven. Except it doesn't reach very high, but eventually it will be an important part of the picture. I don't scorn them, but the fact that they resist any kind of information from the higher levels makes their research very inefficient, I think.
Yes, and expensive.
Yes.